Hello, everybody over in Facebook land and Instagram, for those of you who are watching over at Scorpio Rising. And it is time for another lovely round of our chart interpretations. We've got 8 charts. I'm doing 8 charts every single morning via live platforms. And if you would like your chart to be a part of it, please feel free to submit your birth date, place, and exact birth time, and we will get you on the list. This started as a fun project about a week ago now, where I asked everybody on social media if they wanted me to do some random astrology babble stuff, and it's been affectionately nicknamed the Astro-Babble, where I basically just talk astrology at your face for an hour, but we do that in the context of reading people's charts. Apparently somebody's trying to back up. An Amazon truck is trying to back up right in front of my window. Thanks, Amazon. Here, shout out to you. Going the wrong way. Anyway, getting distracted doing this at home in my home studio, but we've got 8 charts here that we're going to be diving into. Again, if you'd like your chart featured, feel free to post it. Private message me specifically. Don't post it. Don't post your birth date on public forums. And then also we will. If you have additional questions, you can always message me, Sam at ScorpioRisingAstrology.com. Hi, Brandon. Hi, everybody jumping on. And yeah, so we're going to get into it, but I'm also available for private consults as well if you'd like something a little bit more intimate instead of the public forum. So let's pop open a fizzy water and get this day started. Okay. First chart is Melody. Melody was born at 5:47 a.m. In Connecticut. Let's take a look at Melody's chart. She's got the sun and the ascendant in Cancer, as well as Mercury and Mars in Cancer. That's a fun little pileup, mini stellium there on the first house of self. That's glorious. The moon is also in Leo in the second house, as well as Venus is in Leo in the second. So we've got some pretty strong personality markers right off the bat. I think that one of the interesting things about Melody's chart right away is that her sun and her moon are in what's known as mutual reception. So the idea that each planet has a sign or a couple signs that it rules. And in the case of the moon rules Cancer. In the case of the sun rules Leo. And the fact that her sun is in Cancer, the moon sign, and her moon is in Leo, the sun sign, means that they are in mutual reception, or they've swapped each other's signs, kind of like they're staying at each other's Airbnb is a good way to think about it. And because of that, they're trustworthy, they know each other, they have a sense of mutual rapport. That automatically means that the sun being in the first house of self, the moon being in the second house of finance, that Melody over-identifies or identifies very strongly with her financial state, and her money reflects who she is as a person from just her personality makeup, really. There are multiple facets to Melody's personality because she has so many planets in her first house of self. But one of the big ones, especially because those 2 planets are in mutual reception in the first and second houses, is that idea that money, material wealth, and everything that second house represents is intimately connected to her identity, or who she feels she is. So that's really interesting. We've got also her Mars in Cancer, not the best sign for Mars because it's technically in its detriment there, the opposing sign to its exaltation in Capricorn. But Mars is ruling the 5th house of creativity and the 10th house of career. So it wouldn't surprise me if Melody turned out to be very artsy, if Melody used her creative abilities in a way that made her a better mom, because the 5th house is not just about creativity, it's also about children. Let's see what else. That 5th house of that Mars in the first ruling that 10th house of success and career. I think that one of the things that I see a lot with people with that chart placement is entrepreneurship, and the idea that regardless of what condition Mars is in, just the idea that there is a identity that forms in Melody's chart about her constantly striving for success and wanting to be the best person that she can be. Somebody who's slightly addicted to growth, would be a good way to think about it. I also see that with ninth and 10th, because the ninth house is that house of higher learning. And when the ninth is connected to the 10th, there also tends to be that kind of can't read enough books, can't take enough courses, can't do enough to be my best version of self. So that's an interesting little tidbit. Because Venus is in the second house of finance, ruling her Saturn in Taurus in the 11th house of friendships, the idea that friends and social groups will be a part of Melody's income is also part of the equation. I think that that's an interesting placement for a couple reasons. It brings activism into the equation. One of the ways that Melody might actually find great amounts of personal success, but also social success, is by donating some of her creative works, whether that's time, whether that's energy, whether that's physical pieces, to charity, and helping foster some of those issues that she cares very deeply about, but also to make money and enjoy that financial part of her personality while making a difference. Saturn is in the 11th house, so friendships are a little bit difficult for Melody, or were at least in the first 30 years of life, because wherever Saturn is placed, we don't find a lot of connection really until that first Saturn return, and then we start to unpack those gifts gradually. So Saturn being in her 11th house of friendships, social group, and kind of like the house of one's tribe. Yeah. Having Saturn there means that she was a late bloomer in terms of friendships, but if she actually utilizes her financial wellness in order to stimulate her friendships, but also her social group dynamics, I think that might be a really interesting way for Melody to express that second house, 11th house connection. So that's a good fun little tidbit there. Second house, that's a fun interpretation. Second house Venus is also ruling the fourth house of family, meaning that money is naturally going to be derived from family topics, or not just when I see second house and fourth house connected, it's family money, especially because she's got Jupiter and Libra here. Jupiter makes things big. But when we look at the fourth house, second house connection, she might actually use some of her leverage to get her family to donate to charitable causes, because Venus is that fulcrum between the fourth house and the 11th house, the idea of bringing that family money into social endeavors and really using her financial clout to stimulate those projects that she feels passionate about on a global scale. So interesting stuff about Melody's chart. I think that that's super fun. There's just so much about the financial house and so much about the first house of self that I think are really important. Yes, everybody. So for those of you who are joining on, hello, hello, hello. Yes, I am doing live birth chart readings. If you would like to submit your birth chart to the queue, all I need is your exact birth time, your birth date, and your birthplace. Please spell out your birth month and day for me, for those of you especially who are overseas, so that I know which is your month, which is your day. And yes, if you would like to add yourself to the queue, right now I'm about 3 days out with my queue, so you can always schedule a private session in the meantime at scorpiorisingastrology.com, my website. But yes, I'm doing live birth chart readings for everybody who's jumping on Instagram and Facebook. And right now we are on birth chart number 2. Hello, Vicky, my darling. Okay, so let's go to Alicia, or Alicia. Alicia? Alicia. We'll go with Alicia because I like the way that sounds better. She was born at 8 a.m. in Lebanon. Yes. Girl. Oh my God. Woo, that is a Libra. That is a Libra stellium, girl. That is massive. You've got Mercury, you've got Venus, you've got the Sun, you've got Saturn, you've got Pluto. Pluto conjoining your ascendant. Oh my God. Oh, love it. So fabulous. As somebody who also has Pluto on the ascendant, I'm with you. I totally get you. Let's talk about a couple. There's so much to talk about with the stellium and Libra in the first house of self. We have some personality things early in the morning. Let's talk about Pluto conjunct the ascendant for 2 seconds, because this is something that I think I'm uniquely qualified to talk about. When Pluto touches the ascendant, Pluto is that gateway into the underworld. It often brings a psychopomp energy to the person or the native who has that Pluto on the ascendant, mediumship qualities, deep levels of intuition, being able to communicate with those who have passed, unique connection to all underworld deities, but also understanding that like we get death in a way that other people don't. We're in contact with those forces in such an intimate way because Pluto, that planet that rules the underworld, is directly on our ascendant, which is kind of the helm of the natal chart. And when we see Pluto in practice, it's often a planet that matures slowly over time, but there's an immense level of power here. And so when we see Pluto conjunct the ascendant, there's an idea that it brings an enormous amount of charisma, of potential, of power and clout to the personality. Unfortunately, that power is a slow drip. It's a gradual unlock. It's not something like the moon or the sun placements where we really get a dose of it right at the time of our birth. It's something that we have to unlock gradually as we level up through life. I've talked about it almost on every kind of forecast or every one of these live videos. Pluto is a level 50 planet. It's one of those planets that really matures about halfway through the life. But the fact that it's so conjunct the ascendant, Alicia, I think that discovering or working with those deities, those entities, that side of yourself that's often dark, mysterious, but also terribly powerful is an important part, as well as shadow work, subconscious work, and understanding those archetypes that are very connected to your ascendant. We've also got Saturn here, which is really interesting. Saturn in Libra is actually in the sign of its exaltation, so props to Alicia for putting that in the first house. Absolutely wonderful. It is also out of the combustion of the sun at 14 degrees. Saturn is at 23, so that 7.5 degree difference is separated, and that's lovely. So Saturn isn't afflicted and stays in its exaltation. Mercury, Venus, the sun, there's just so much personality power in Alicia's chart. I think that the more she understands the basic tenets of Libra, the easier it will be to navigate her life and what her purpose is in this world. Libra is the peacekeeper. Libra is the one who interjects themselves into a situation, is able to identify all the constituents and tell you what's beautiful and what's not beautiful, what is just and what is unjust, what is fair and what is not fair, what needs to go and what needs to stay, and make a case for each of those things. And I think that Libra often gets a bad rap for being indecisive, but in fact, Libra just doesn't want to make people angry. So it knows what it would do in that situation. It knows Libra is an expert at walking into somebody's life and being able to rearrange everything in a way that is for their highest good. Can't always do that for themselves because they're a little bit too objective. But because Libra is literally that sign of the scales, the ability of Libra to enter any situation, understand what parts are broken, what parts can be fixed, what parts need to be thrown away, what parts are really the shining star of that person, of that place, of that point in time, and to be able to work with those things effectively and mediate what needs to be mediated, but also to release what needs to be released. I think that's a core tenet of Alicia's personality right there. Which is super powerful. Because she also has Venus in Libra, it is in its proper sign. It is slightly combust the sun, though. So there is an idea of that true potential of Libra being slightly eclipsed by the sun's rays. When Libra gets its ego involved, there's often this need to help, versus somebody who understands their own worth and value and is able to just offer their power freely because it's who they are. And I think that that's part of the Pluto lesson as well, is understanding what it means to be somebody who needs to help. Yeah. Somebody who needs to be of value versus somebody who is of value. No questions asked. Yeah, so working on that effortless contribution as opposed to trying to fit into the role that is determined for you. Taurus is on the 8th house, which means that all of that Libra energy is also connected to the 8th, when it comes to death, taxes, and other people's money. Wouldn't surprise me if Alicia actually worked in a field that touched death, whether that's hospice, whether that's estate planning, whether that's morgue work, whether that's I don't know. It would be really interesting, like as an extreme case, uh, if she worked on the financial payout board for like natural disasters like the World Trade Center. That would be a really beautiful way that she, with all of her Libra-ness, could both calm people, allocate resources, and make the most of a dying situation. She's got her moon in Libra. I keep saying Libra. There's just so much Libra in your chart, Alicia. The moon is in Gemini in her ninth house of travel, foreigners, and higher education, ruled by Mercury in Libra, which is absolutely fabulous. So her heart longs to travel, her heart longs to learn, her heart longs to interact with those who are different from her. And I think that that's an excellent skill for any Libran to really have, is that culture, that willingness to think outside of your own parameters, of your own upbringing, of your own quote unquote normal. Yeah. So that's really great. I applaud that effort greatly. Because we've got the North Node in Cancer up in the 10th, this has been a really interesting couple of years for you, Alicia, as you've started to kind of skyrocket career-wise. The issue is that the nodes are squaring that Venus, again, afflicting her natural Libran tendencies. It's a struggle that I see a lot with people with heavy Libra placements is, am I doing this for me, or am I doing this for the good of everybody else? And can I just do this to do this instead of needing to do this? And I think that that's where that Venus really comes in. Venus in Libra is about that effortless expression of balance. There is no need in Venus in Libra. There is only that which is. And there is a natural unfolding of that balance that requires zero effort. And when we look at the North and the South Node, there's this part of Alicia's personality that really is about understanding what it means to be successful, to be in the limelight, to be the best that she can be. But Venus is a goddess. She is who she is, and she doesn't make compromises or feel the need to be better or worse than who she is at any given moment. And I think that that's part of back to the Pluto lesson of personal power. I think one of the things that Alicia will come to understand, if she hasn't already, is that she has everything that she needs in this moment. There is nothing that needs to be strived for. It's just a matter of time before somebody recognizes her value, but she can't seek that out. It has to be observed naturally as she continues to unfold her petals and allow that Venusian Libra to come into its full potential as a goddess of balance. So that's a good summary. Hello, everybody. Thank you for all the messages. I appreciate you. Yes, we are doing live chart consults. Hello, Raven, Rick, Melody, Tara, Fatima, Alicia. Alicia is a medium for a living. Fabulous. She talks to spirit every day. Jennifer, Alicia, again, yes, thank you so much. I appreciate it. That is what we're doing. We're doing live chart consults. If you would like to be a part, submit your exact birth date, place, time to me via private message. And if you would like a private consult, I'm open for those as well. I also have classes at scorpiorisingastrology.com. We're getting a little bit behind, so I got to speed it up. We're moving to Julianne. Julianne was born 7:26 a.m. in Seattle. Again, packed ascendant. Goodness gracious. So this is obviously the theme of the morning. All this ascendant action. We've got Mercury, the sun this time in Leo, as well as Venus in Leo, and obviously the ascendant in Leo, all in the first house. That's a powerful personality. We're dealing with some pretty powerful personalities first thing in the morning, especially with, Julianne, a Saturn in Aries trine to the ascendant in the ninth. That's fun. So let's talk about the ninth house in conjunction with the first. So again, that idea of travel, higher education, foreigners, intimately connected with Julianne's ascendant. I think that if there was one thing that I would encourage you to do, it would actually be to travel. Despite your Scorpio moon in the fourth really wanting you to be a homebody, there is this side of you that is so enthralled by the idea of other cultures, and really understanding that if you were to unlock the ability to travel and to travel extensively, mind you, especially if it was in a healing capacity, whether that's retreats or whether that's facilitating retreats for other people, maybe doing Peace Corps work. Yeah, that would be fun. But just the idea that Saturn and Aries in the ninth making a trine to the ascendant, there really is this powerful potential for you to travel and get a lot of soul journey work in the travel, because the North Node in Aries is also in the ninth. You're striving towards this mastery of that ninth house, where being learned, being cultured, being a world traveler is something that I think is a very extensive part of why you're here this time around. And because that ninth house is being ruled by Mars in the 12th, the idea of potential hidden enemies, potentially being a caregiver or working from a hospitalization standpoint in connection with that travel, that might be, again, like I see it, Peace Corps. Like that's the image that comes to mind, is you going into foreign countries, potentially into enemy lines with warring civilizations, where you're actually able to bring that Mars and Cancer to fruition in the 12th and actually apply aid to those in a conflict or combat situation. Because you've got such a powerful personality, you've got Mercury in the first, which naturally gives you language skills, ruled by the Sun in Leo in the first, which just gives you super solar energy, just a bright bubble of joy you are. Despite that really reclusive, emotional moon in Scorpio, which we'll talk about in a second. Then you've also got Venus in Leo. Anything that Venus touches, she brings a lot of love, a lot of affection, a lot of grace to the situation. And to have that so close to the ascendant being the marker of personality and self, I think that you've got some great charisma. I think that you've got some great juice behind your personality that can really help in those situations where chaos rules. Let's see. We've got Jupiter and Virgo in the second, ruled by Mercury and Leo in the first. So that idea of finance again being connected to the personality. But we've got Uranus and Pluto here as well in the second. So finance is a little bit of a difficult topic. There's a lot of financial stuff because Jupiter is in the second, so it just doubles the energy of that house. So we've got a lot of stuff financially, but the financial stuff might be debt related, it might be loans, it might be unpredictability with like rent, because Uranus is here giving unpredictability. Pluto is here, which we've already talked about, that deeper, more powerful energy that matures over time, but can be potentially toxic for the first 50 years of life. Because we've got the moon at 21 degrees about to conjoin Neptune in Scorpio at 23 in the fourth house of family, there is a history of family addiction that we just need to be slightly aware of. The home tends to be a little bit of a toxic environment, which is another reason why I think traveling is such a good outlet for you, is because it pulls you out of that environment where if you sit too long in that family dynamic, if you sit too long in the house, you start to ferment, you start to get a little bit gross, would be a good way to think about it, especially emotionally, because the moon is there in Scorpio. So all of those heavy feelings just kind of sit and they stagnate, and they start to bring forward a lot of those ghosts of the past, would be a good way to think about it. Let's see. I think that pretty much wraps up everything that I'd like to say about Julie's chart. Great chart, travel, great personality, a little bit of finance, a little bit of home stuff, specifically staying out of the house and into more travel stuff. Still reeling from yesterday. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Hey, everybody, Vicky and Jen having a conversation in the chat. I absolutely love you too. Yes, doing live chart readings. If you would like your chart read, submit your birth date, place, time and we will get to it. Speaking of Vicky, let's talk about Vicky. Vicky was born in September at 2:38 a.m. in Eureka. And we've got a Leo ascendant. Leo ascendant and Mars in the first. That's fun. There is a slight aggressive tint to the personality whenever we see Mars in the first. Mars is also in Leo, which is a fire sign, and when Mars is in a fire sign, it does get that fire power from Leo. So we need to just be aware that right out of the bat, there is going to be this explosive, angry, slightly aggressive side to the self that just needs to be discharged on a regular basis. Just make sure that nobody's around when you do that, because you have a tendency to burn and cut and slash and launch yourself on a war path, because Mars is that planet associated with war and conflict. And because of that, we just need to make sure that Mars is treated appropriately. Interesting, we've got Mars in the first ruling Saturn in Aries retrograde in the ninth. So again, the idea that travel would be an excellent outlet. Higher education would be an excellent outlet. So would interacting with foreign cultures. I would highly suggest working in the retreat space. I would highly suggest working on, even if you were to work on, like, because Leo is that marketing aspect of like being flamboyant and being dramatic and showing people what your stuff is. If you worked on marketing campaigns for travel companies, that would be an excellent expression of that. But specifically, we want you to actually travel, not something that you did in the first 30 years of life, but something that will, I think, continue to be a theme, because Saturn tends to mature after 30. We do have the North Node here. So the more that you choose to stay at home instead of living in that space of exploring other cultures, the more you're going to feel like something's just not right and you're not necessarily on that right path. We've got a lot of planets in that second house of finance. Again, we've got that same lineup of Jupiter in the second house, Pluto and Uranus in the second house, but also the Sun in the second house in Virgo. Although this would normally be a good lineup for finance with the Sun in Virgo in the second, because we've got Pluto and Uranus here, as well as Jupiter just making things big. Money tends to be a little bit of a ball pit, like the ball pits at the kids' playthings, where there's just so much of it and they're all different colors and they're all going everywhere and you're not sure, and oh, there's a child, and oh, there's another child, and oh my gosh, it's just this controlled chaos that you can't really. It's like Vicky is that person in the financial ball pit that's trying to sort the balls into different colors, but she can't manage it, because every time that she gets like 4 of yellow and 4 of blue and 4 of green, a kid just like jumps in front of her and bounces them all away. And that's that Uranus energy making unpredictability when it comes to finance. When it comes to other people's finance, however, Vicky is actually exceedingly smart, because we've got Jupiter in Virgo ruling the 8th house of taxes and accounting, as well as client work. So taking one-on-one clients and being a little bit more specific, as opposed to working for larger corporations, you would succeed very, very well in that entrepreneurship dynamic, not necessarily working for a larger company, but dealing with people one-on-one is a lot more financially successful than kind of looking at your own cash flow. We've got another theme today, Venus in Libra. Venus in Libra is also in the third. So we've got, and Mercury is here too. Lovely, lovely formation for communication, for teaching, for being great with neighbors, for to getting along with cousins and relatives. Venus in Libra in the third naturally gives a pleasant tone to the voice when speaking. So it's one of those things where when I see Venus in Libra in the third, I could listen to you talk all day. That's the kind of beauty that we see Libra investing into the third house of communication. The South Node is here, though, so I think that although communication is a gift, it's not necessarily where the work needs to be done. The work needs to be done not necessarily in communication and teaching, but taking that teaching abroad into the 9th house and working on those higher levels of education, working on taking that that immediate comfort zone and pushing it into a broader spectrum where you're actually potentially working with clients abroad, but not necessarily in your own backyard, because you've already learned how to do that. It's not something that's interesting to you. So we need to activate that north node instead of the south node in the chart, and really understand that the ninth house is where the focus should be to grow the spirit, as it were. But because that Mercury in Libra in the third is ruling the moon in Gemini in the 11th, we've got some really cool friends, like really cool friends, friends that have good communication as well. Something that you might want to rely on, especially if you find yourself in a bad spot, or if you find that the financial stuff or the personality stuff is a little bit too difficult at any given time. The moon is actually in a really good position with all of the rest of your chart except for that financial house. Talking to friends about finances, not necessarily going to help, but you might find some relief just in the talking of it, because we find Mercury and the moon both in air signs, one in the third, one in the 11th. Just the idea that talking about your problems, vocalizing, putting wind behind the words, and letting the words kind of fall out of your mouth really does bring a lot of excellent decompression to the emotional stressors of the life from your natal chart's perspective. Awesome. So that is a little bit about Vicky. We are about halfway. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming on. Thank you, Julianne, for that feedback. I appreciate you. Yes, we are doing live chart readings. If you would like your chart put in queue, feel free to send me a private message to either Instagram or Facebook with your birth date, place, and exact birth time. I do need that exact birth time, and we will put you in the queue. We've got about 3 days worth of queue in between. Yes, Harriet, send the dates via private message. That would be the best thing to do, and I will add you to that queue. If you would like a private reading in the meantime and would prefer your stuff not be on social media, definitely send me a private message and we can schedule a consult. Or if you'd like to take a class and start learning astrology, I have that on my website, scorpiorisingastrology.com. We're halfway through. We got 4 more to go. Let's talk about Rachel. Hey, Rachel, who was born at 8:15 a.m. in Stroudsburg. Here we have the ascendant, and the ascendant is very close to Mars in Cancer. So we've got the ascendant in Cancer, Mars in Cancer. Again, Mars in its detriment here. Ooh, Mars in Cancer is also opposing Saturn retrograde in Cap in the 7th. That's rough, Rachel. So we've got some personality and relationship conflicts right off the bat in Rachel's chart. We need to understand that she may be attracted to somebody who is much older than her, because Saturn in Capricorn in the 7th, that's kind of what we see. Even if it's not an age thing, somebody who tends to be rather set in their ways, somebody who tends to be rather curmudgeon-y, somebody who tends to be rather restrictive. Yeah. And that restriction just really doesn't do well with Mars in Cancer. Although Mars in Cancer is in detriment, it can shine really brightly as somebody who's a very active caregiver. And Saturn in Capricorn doesn't really like to be taken care of. And I think that that's one of the major relationship dynamics that Rachel needs to be aware of, is the partner that she chooses, or the partner that she naturally kind of defaults into pursuing, doesn't need her help. And that's a very harsh statement for somebody with the Mars in Cancer conjoin the ascendant to hear, especially because we've got Mars ruling that 10th house of career success. It's difficult when you mold your life around the identity of I can help, and then the one person that you choose to spend your life with has decided that they don't need your help. And that can be very, very conflicting of a message, for sure. That Mars in Scorpio is making a nice trine to both Pluto and the moon in Scorpio in the 5th. So one of the ways that you might actually discharge a lot of that partnership conflict is through children and through your creative endeavors. Specifically, your children will get you. They'll understand exactly what you mean emotionally. They'll be able to intuit that, because we've got Pluto and the Moon in Scorpio in the fifth. Any children that you do have will be extremely intuitive, blessed by the underworld, touched by that veil that is both in and not in the physical. And so that's lovely, but also that trine between the ascendant, the personality, and that fifth house of creativity. I think that we find a lot of really good potential for you to use your creative resources wisely, but also from a personal growth perspective, use those creative resources to kind of transmute yourself into the best version of who you can be. Because that Mars is ruling both the fifth house of creativity and the 10th house of career, making what you love your job, could potentially be in the cards for you. However, what you do for a living is going to be slightly toxic just in general. We've got some deeper themes here that we need to talk about, Rachel. So let's continue to dive in. Your sixth house of work is being ruled by Jupiter and Gemini in the 12th, as well as Mercury and Gemini retrograde here and Venus and Gemini here in the 12th. There is a lot to talk about with the 12th because it's one of the houses that we don't necessarily like to see planets in. It is a house of hidden enemies. It is a house of hospitalizations. It's a house of major transits where somebody is at the end of the rope and they have to make the decision whether or not to stay in the situation that they're in. And that could be the physical life, and that could be a metaphoric situation as well. But just the idea that there is that kind of knife to the throat quality to the work environment and has been throughout the life. It's not necessarily a comfortable place. Because Mercury is in Gemini here, there's good communication potential. It is retrograde, which makes it a little bit backwards, but Venus is here to kind of counterbalance. I think that if we were to look at mediumship qualities, that would be a given. I think if we were to look at you being able to navigate a hospital very well, that would be a given. Working in hospice would be excellent. Working in a hospital specifically would be up your alley because you have to learn that foreign language. You have to learn what is said and what is not said. You have to be able to work with so many moving parts, and Gemini can really work with all those moving parts. So can Mercury. Venus here also makes things much sweeter and more lovely. You have both benefics in the 12th house of that hidden enemies and hospitalizations. So you're really able to turn those toxic situations into sweetness and into prosperity in a way that other people just can't. And I think that's because you have so much water energy in your chart. You have so much of that Pluto, Scorpio, Mars energy in your chart. You've just got this really great way of taking the water, taking the fire, and putting them together, even though they normally don't go together. And as part of your job, you kind of making it work and MacGyvering all of the energetics that you surround yourself with on a daily basis. That's really, really interesting. The one thing that we just need to be aware of is all of that caregiving and all of that MacGyvering and all of that really cool stuff that's in your natal chart, Rachel, does not apply to your relationships because you cannot care for somebody enough to make them change. And that's a really difficult lesson for us to hear, but especially having Saturn and Capricorn retrograde in the 7th, your partner is completely self-sufficient. They do not need you in any way, shape, or form. And you can find those outlets through your creativity, through your work, through your children, like we already talked about. But just don't go to the hardware store for milk when it comes to your relationship. Let that be a support structure. Let them be that shoulder to cry on. But don't think that you can use the same skills that you do professionally to soothe your relationships. That's not going to work out. Excellent. Thank you, Rachel, for donating your chart. Thank you, everybody, for sending in your birth dates, places, and times to be added to the queue. Love you, love you, love you. Appreciate it. We're going live on Instagram as well as Facebook right now. Instagram is at Scorpio Rising Astrology if you'd like to follow that. If you don't see my daily forecasts on Facebook, I do those every day. Private consults also available. Just shoot me an email, sam@scorpiorisingastrology.com. And we're moving on to Helen. Helen was born at 8:15 p.m. in Swansea. Swansea. Ooh, Pluto on the ascendant. Pluto on the ascendant. Yay. Number 2. So we've already talked about Pluto on the ascendant, Helen. That just brings underworld themes into the personality. You understand death very well. You understand what it means to lose somebody, but also not to lose somebody, because spiritually we're connected beyond the physical plane. Your mediumship qualities, especially because your ascendant and your Pluto are both in Virgo, ruled by Gemini. Mediumship qualities are a big thing. That Mercury in Capricorn making an exact trine to almost exact trine between the Pluto and the ascendant at 1 degree and 5 degrees. Wow, that's great, Helen. You've got a gift there for. I would definitely pursue the spiritual arts if you don't already. The idea that magic, medicine, and mysticism are right in your ballpark. That's super cool. Yeah, so that's absolutely lovely. And because you've got the sun in Capricorn here, we just over identify with that idea of children, sexuality, creativity, being trying to the ascendant, the personality. That's just a really big thing. Cool. The sun is also ruling that 12th house of hospitalizations, hidden enemies. Great place for you to put your sun if you're going to be working in the world of death. That's absolutely flawless. You've just got so many great placements that confirm that Pluto on the ascendant being such a powerful piece of who you are. Yeah, that's really great. I'm really impressed with that. Oh yeah, that's another side to the story. That's another big side to the story. Let's talk about that. So we've got the Mars, Moon, Saturn all in Sagittarius. Mars specifically ruling the 8th house of death. Everything in Sagittarius being in the 4th house of family. So the fact that the house of family is connected with the house of death, early on in life, there might have been a sudden passing of parents, which again confirmed the Pluto on the ascendant being touched or being stroked by death early on. It definitely awakened a lot of those qualities in you specifically. But because we've got the moon in Sagittarius, moon in Sagittarius is always up for a good time. We've got that playful energy when it comes to it all. And I think that that's what really helps to counterbalance a lot of the heaviness in your chart. Saturn in Sag is here, ruling that 5th house of creativity. A family member might have also taught you a creative skill that I think would be really valuable to you. It wouldn't surprise me if those mediumship qualities were passed down from generation to generation. For sure. 4th house of family is ruling 3rd house of communication. Again, something to do with the family being tied into the communication teaching space, or you being taught by your family at an early age those masterful lessons that you would then turn into your life's purpose. Really great stuff. Your chart's just flowing super well. We do have Mercury in Aquarius in the 6th, being ruled by that Saturn in Sag in the 4th. So what you do is, again, part of the family business. It's part of that. It's part of that legacy that you've been trained in. Would be a good way to think about it. But because that Venus in Aquarius is retrograde, it's a little bit in a tough spot, and it is just 4 degrees away from an opposition with Uranus. Although that's separating, it's still the idea that trauma and separation when it comes to the work environment are intimately connected. You've learned how to master it, but you can't shake that feeling of that instability in the career space, in the workspace. I think that's pretty much it in the chart. That's really lovely. I mean, good. All right, earning potential with Mercury, or Venus rather, in Aquarius retrograde. Not an ideal placement for Venus to be. And she is ruling the house of finance, so finance might not come as easily, but it will definitely come if she's a hard worker. If she works hard, she'll be able to reap the rewards financially. But really, the big career move, I think, is going to be tied up with the mediumship qualities. I think that's really what the chart begs for, is that idea of working with the supernatural and the underworld currents that Pluto on the ascendant really brings forward in her chart. And that's ruled again by the Saturn and Sag in the 4th, just that idea of transmitting the family's legacy over time and going into that family lineage of spiritual practice in order to fulfill your life's purpose. Good stuff, Helen. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Rachel, Vicky, lovely. Thank you for everybody who continues to message me as we do these live casts. If you'd like to see a replay of the live casts, just go to the YouTube channel, search for Scorpio Rising Astrology. I am not talking about today's placements. I do those in the forecast posts that I do every day on Facebook and Instagram. Right now, I'm doing something new that I've done for the past couple days where I take 8 natal charts of people who have sent in their birth date, place, and time, and I'm doing just live kind of impromptu readings. I generate their charts and then I just go live and see what I see and talk about astrology. I call it Astro-Babble, and it's a fun time. Okay. Let's move on. We got to talk about Susie. Susie was born at 10:38 p.m. in Forest. And we've got the ascendant at 10 degrees Aquarius, meaning y'all. Okay, so we moved from a stellium in the first house to now we're talking about death, and death being the major topic of the day. Goodness gracious. So Susie's ascendant in Aquarius is ruled by Saturn in Virgo in the 8th house of death, taxes, and estates. Again, meaning that Susie will find a large portion of her identity in those house topics. It does give slight entrepreneurship energy because the 8th house does deal with clients and other people's money. But when we look at Saturn ruling the ascendant, it automatically indicates a late bloomer. So somebody who doesn't really come into their own until the first 30 years of life. Then everything starts to open up and be accessed because of that time principle that Saturn rules. There will also be a second wave of that realization around 58 during the second Saturn return. We have the North Node in Virgo here in the 8th as well. So part of Susie's real life path in this life experience is to understand the idea of death, taxes, and estates, and accounting, and working with other people's money. She's got a head for it. She knows it. It's something that she understands the power and the value of, or has understood the power and the value of as she's gotten older. And I think that her life has really set her up to understand why that is important. And we'll talk about the deeper themes of that as we continue to unpack her chart. So I think a big connection between that is going to be the 6th house of work, having the Sun in Cancer, Venus in Cancer as well, and Venus ruling Pluto and Libra in the 9th. So what she does for work, she's had to get massive amounts of schooling for. And in fact, I think she'll go back to school halfway through her life in order to pursue deeper education, or she might actually move into a teaching role halfway through her life because she's accrued so much firsthand experience. Whenever I see Cancer in the 6th house, it's a really interesting indication that digestive issues need to be focused on specifically, because Cancer is that sign of the stomach and what is ingested, and specifically that 6th house being the house of health. But also 6th house is the house of work. And when we find Venus and the Sun both in the 6th, there's an idea of being the octomom as caregiver, professional, as part of the ego really coming forward. So somebody who is really who puts I'm going to say this, Susie, and it's going to sound bad, but I know you know what I'm talking about. Somebody who puts the mother in smother, and somebody who does that for a living. Like, your job is to take care of people. Your job is to go the distance and to really make people feel like they are surrounded with this warm kind of motherly love that Cancer, and specifically Venus in Cancer and the Sun in Cancer, can be bringing forward in a work environment. So that's really lovely. I think that's a wonderful way to express those qualities. Let's see, we've got Moon in Aries in the 3rd, being ruled by Mars and Gemini in the 5th. So creative writing, something that naturally will come easy to Susie. I think that's a really good way for Susie to unlock some of her emotions as well, because the moon is involved. The idea that writing down her problems, writing out the situations, and putting something down on paper will be very, very helpful. Especially because Mercury rules that Mars and that Saturn in the eighth. Contracts and writing is something that she's going to have to do throughout her entire lifetime. We do have Mercury and Jupiter both in Leo in the seventh. Susie, you've got somebody. You're attracted to people with big personalities, quick wits, lots of color, lots of drama potentially, but somebody who's a shrewd businessman, fast talker, and potentially works in both that medical and legal field as well. When we look at her Mercury and her Jupiter, both in Leo, not necessarily exactly opposing the ascendant, but pretty close within 3 and 4 degrees respectively, there's going to be some emotional conflict with who she's attached to. And I think that if she understands that the person that she brings into her life is not necessarily supposed to be a perfect fit, but maybe, especially in her case, is supposed to push her to recognize her innate talents and skills. Somebody who understands and sees her own value where she cannot, somebody who is able to unlock parts of her chart that she is not able to, somebody who she might actually meet through her work environment, but who would be in a authority position to her because Jupiter is that kingly planet. Yes. Because we've got that Saturn in Virgo being ruled by Mercury in Leo in the seventh. This is a little bit tough because the seventh house of relationships is connected to the eighth house of death. So the passing of a spouse prematurely, potentially in the cards, especially from a heart condition, spouses with heart conditions, because Mercury and Jupiter both make for an enlarged heart, but also a heart where the valves aren't closing properly or the valves are hypermobile, potential aneurysm stuff. Just things that I think are not necessarily ideal, but we do need to talk for them. I think that part of Susie's chart about her idea of planning, being surrounded by death, taxes, estates. She understands the power of a last will and testament. She knows that life can be really unpredictable. That's part of what she's good at, is predicting the unpredictable and kind of using that mothering energy to bring forward a lot of comfort in times of strife. But when it comes to her partner, although the partner pushes her and pushes her and pushes her, there might be some connection to the partner passing prematurely, or the partner actually helping her or being a part of her work dynamic in a way that helps her to realize what she does and why she does it. So that's a big thing with Susie. Thank you, everybody, for coming on. Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Liz. Love you, Liz. And Julian, yes, if you would like to submit your birth chart, your birth date, place, and exact birth time, I will put you in the queue. The queue is about 3 days long right now, because this is getting super popular, and I'm very excited, and thank you, everybody, for submitting. But I have you all in the queue. I do 8 charts a day, and then I will message you either on Instagram or Facebook, wherever you submit the information, to let you know when you will be when your chart will be featured and what number you are in the queue, so that you can kind of check the video or the replay if you've got something going on that day. Okay, we've got one more chart. Let's get to it. Last chart of the day is Brian. Brian was born at 11 a.m. in Tampa. Let's go to Brian's chart. So we've got Taurus on the ascendant, ruled by Venus and Aries in the 12th. That's really interesting. Okay, so when we look at either the sun being in the 12th or the ruler of the ascendant being in the 12th, we find that personality marker is in the house of hidden enemies. And so it's often somebody who who is very down on themselves, very hard on themselves, and lacks self-esteem. We just need to be aware that that's a crucial component of Brian's chart. Surrounding yourself with people who pick you up instead of put you down, very, very important for you, especially because that Venus in Aries is ruled by Mars in Cancer in the third. One of those hidden enemy triggers might actually be in the immediate family with siblings or cousins or people that you're related to specifically, like they know the buttons to push, they know where to stick the claws, and that's going to be toxic. So we need to surround yourself with people, places, things that lift you up, show you your value. You've got a lot to give with a Taurus ascendant and that Venus and Aries ruling it. Like there's so much that you can contribute, and you're just overflowing with wealths of time and energy and resources for people that you really care about. Unfortunately, we need to get you to care about yourself a little bit more as well. We do have the Sun and Saturn and Mercury all in Aquarius in the 10th. So whether Brian likes it or not, he's going to be super successful. Where he is super successful might actually be in the ninth house of travel, higher education, as well as foreigners. Teaching a foreign language might actually be what he's known for, as well as being a college professor, or somebody who travels extensively for work, works in foreign relations, being an interpreter. Yeah, that would also be on the table because Mercury is in the 10th house of career success, the idea that communication will be involved. Saturn is there in Aquarius, which is all about those higher ideals that are accrued over time and passing down those ideas naturally. And then all of that is ruling that 9th house of foreigners, travel, and higher education. So that's kind of where we get that. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, that's very interesting. Yeah, because that Mercury in Aquarius is ruling the second house of finance. It wouldn't surprise me if early on in life, here's the scenario. When I look at the planets, I always think of like the most exact definition of what could have happened based on planetary structure. And it might not have happened this way, but this is the best example that I can give you. So because we've got Mercury in Aquarius in the 10th, ruling the second house of finance in Gemini with the South Node there, he might have actually earned some extra cash translating for family members when he was younger. Like his mom or family members or people that were close to him or neighbors would like give him a couple dollars for like translating at the grocery store or working with solicitors or people on the phone or paying bills, something like that, because we see that connection between the 4th house of family, the 10th house of career, and the 2nd house of finance, but the South Node, that previous life experience in the 2nd house of finance. So that's really interesting. I think that's funny, just because it's like, you've got this language thing, Brian, and you've got this really dependable kind of slow and steady, carefree nature, or not carefree nature, but caring nature, where people just trust you. You're very trustworthy. And so you come forward with this value and you're able to give people security, especially when it comes to language interpretation, working with that translator ability that you naturally have, and creating this sense of rapport between people where language might have been that barrier to begin with. Let's see, we've got Jupiter in Libra retrograde ruled by Venus in Aries in the 12th. Although we've talked a lot about Brian's career potential in terms of what would be the highest expression of his success, I think that we have some other issues that we need to talk about when it comes to Brian's daily work, because astrology separates finance from what somebody does for a day job versus what somebody is really good at for their long-term career and success. Instagram's about to stop, so check the rest of the Facebook for the rest of the message if you'd like to talk about Brian a little bit more. But because we have the 6th house of work ruled by that Venus and Aries in the 12th house of hidden enemies, I think we just need to be slightly aware that what Brian does for a day job, he's more likely to hate, and he's more likely to develop enemies in that workspace. Or just on a positive expression, he might work for like billing at a hospital, you know. So that's a really interesting side note, is if Brian takes a job or like a secondary job just to like pay the bills, it's often going to be filled with that kind of contentious relationship that will exacerbate a lot of his insecurities as opposed to fueling a lot of his potential, which we've talked about in the chart. Because we've got Pluto and Scorpio in the seventh, there's a spousal relationship that, oh goodness, there's a spousal relationship that might be actually extremely toxic. The people that Brian is attracted to are very deep, very spiritual, have that kind of mystical vibe to them. Somebody who knows about the underbelly of life, somebody who's been touched by death, trauma, who has a fond understanding of sexual expression, who knows what the taboo is and knows how to work with it, is something that Brian is innately attracted to in somebody else. However, when it comes to Pluto again tends to be rather toxic. So in the first 50 years of life, learning how to handle that partner, Pluto and Scorpio in the seventh is a very powerful placement. And if you don't understand how to work with that individual properly, they might sting you in a way that is very, very uncomfortable. However, if we want to think of how Brian's seventh house Pluto is connected to his Mars in the third, of siblings, writing, teaching, communication, he might actually fall in love with a writer, might be introduced to his spouse by his siblings or cousins, and might find somebody who's like that Edgar Allan Poe archetype, who's, again, slightly dark, broody, toxic, loves to talk about death, that kind of things. But again, that positive spin would be somebody who just really understands the underbelly of life, somebody who gets that, is able to write about that, talk about that, teach about that in a way that's really, really unique, and is potentially introduced via the family dynamic. Yeah. So I think that's a good summary of Brian's chart. We've talked about life potential. We've talked about some stumbling blocks, personal wise, and relationships. That's a good space to end off in. So thank you, everybody, for joining on. Thank you, everybody, for continuing to support my Astro-Babble. I appreciate it. If you found value in this and you'd like to send me a little bit of cash, you can always PayPal me, sam@scorpiorisingastrology.com, or schedule a private consult if you'd like to know more. I can do half-hour, hour and a half sessions. We can talk about all this stuff and more, as well as I have online classes if you're interested in learning about astrology yourself. You can just go to scorpiorisingastrology.com and click the online classes feature. I have classes on the signs, the planets, the houses, herbal energetics, interpreting your moon, stuff like that I think you'll find really valuable, as well as I do the daily forecast on Facebook and Instagram for your viewing pleasure. So that is it. I hope that you've enjoyed another round of Astro-Babble. Thank you, Julie Beth. It is a good babble. I love it. And may the stars be ever in your favor.